Freedom. You say America, and it's probably the next word that comes to mind. It's our fundamental right to live our lives however we want. But freedom isn't something we've always had. When I was 18, I joined the Air Force, and I did well enough on my test to qualify as an electronics countermeasures operator. But I was told I couldn't take that job. Apparently, no black man could fly with the Strategic Air Command. Abraham Lincoln knew that a country could only truly stand for freedom if it applied to all of its people. Around the world, there's a growing tide of freedom. The belief that every person has the right to self-determination is growing stronger and stronger. I wonder if one day we will all be free.
What drives people to fight for freedom?
5 months before elections, they told everybody Putin will be the next president. I was just really angry.
Can we find liberty even when bound in chains?
My mind and emotions were beyond the confines of that cell.
And when will everyone be free to be who they really are?
I want to wear a burqa so nobody sees me as a boy. That's when I felt what freedom really meant.
This is my journey to discover the ties that bind us and the common humanity inside us. This is the story of us. I'm going to meet a man who was born a slave. Shin Dong-hyuk began his life in a North Korean labor camp. It was the only world he knew until he was 23 years old. I wonder what freedom means for someone who first encounters it as an adult. Shin and his wife Leanne are meeting me in New York City to tell me his story.
Nice to meet you. Yes.
How do you do?
Good.
So, how long you two been married?
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah, this April.
Is that a long time yet?
Yeah.
Both. Feels long. At the same time, it feels like it was just yesterday.
Okay, got you out of holder. You've been free now for what?
11 years.
11 years?
Yeah.
Okay. But you were born in a slave labor camp.
Yeah, so
How did it come about that you were to be born there?
my parents go in the camp. I was born in the camp.
They were political prisoners?
Yes.
The United Nations estimates there are about 100,000 political prisoners in North Korea. You can be thrown into a prison camp simply by speaking ill of the country's leader.
Let's talk to me a little bit about daily life while you were in the camp. You were there for a long time.
아침 4시나 4시 반에
We woke up around 4 a.m. and there would be some kind of signal, either a bell, maybe a speaker, and we would know it's time to go and work. So we'd do whatever task it would be. It could be farming corn, rice. It could be working in the coal mines. None of us had dreams or hopes for the future. It was just so natural. That's just the way it was.
Born there, lived there, died there.
우리가 일을 잘못했을 때 간수가 저희들한테 이제 그 초이스를 줘요.
If we do something wrong or don't work well, the guards would give us an option. You can either starve or get beat.
Gee whiz.
그게 뭐 간수가 이제 물론 우리가 그 수용소에서 처음
So one of the rules that we learn is that we are never ever supposed to eat anything that is not given to us. This little girl was probably 6 or 7 at the time, but she must have came across something to eat and she didn't want to eat it all at once and she must have wanted to save it, so she had to hid it in her pocket. And one of the guards had said, "Why didn't you follow the rules? You know better than that." And he repeatedly hit her on her head and eventually she passed out.
그 다음 날 이제 학교에 안 나왔기 때문에 이제 뭐 그때
The next day she didn't come to class, so the guard sent us to go get her, but when we got to the house she was dead.
They beat this child to death?
그러니까 때리는 거.
What about your parents?
그 안에 다른 뭐랄 감정은 다
It's really sad, but they were just fellow prisoners to me. I didn't have any sense of family.
정말 기억하고 싶고 이제 쉽지 않고 이제 잊어버리고
The hardest thing in my whole
그런
life is probably the memory of my mom and my brother. I learned as a child that I'm supposed to report to the guards at any point on my own parents, you know, report if they're doing anything wrong. And the more I report on them, the better off it is for me. So I thought they were escaping and I reported on them. I really had no anticipation or thoughts of what would come from that. There were many people gathered, and my father and I were forced to watch their execution.
엄마랑 형이 죽을 때 사실 이제 개인적으로는
But honestly, I really had no emotion
When it happened?
when it happened.
그냥 엄마하고 형이 잘못을 저질렀고
In a way, I thought it must have been a sin that maybe they
지었구나 하는 것에 대한 그런 반성이라고 할까요?
deserved.
Later, Shin recalls meeting a fellow prisoner named Park, a man who'd traveled throughout North Korea and China. He intoxicated Shin with descriptions of life lived freely and life with food.
이 사람 얘기를 듣다 보니까 너무 재밌었어요. 호기심 나는 그런 얘기들이.
He sparked a lot of curiosity with the things he said.
근데 이제 내가 제일 듣고 싶었던 얘기들은 이제.
But the things that were the most fascinating was the way he was able to express and explain the foods he ate, like pork. The way he would describe it was so interesting and it just pulled me in. Some might consider it kind of foolish or humorous, but for me, it was something as simple as food. It was that simple thought that kind of drove me initially.
To run.
In 2005, January 2nd, we were tasked to work near the fence. I had actually been the one to initially say, maybe this is the time we should try.
According to Shin, when they made their break, Park arrived at the fence first, but he accidentally touched the electric wire. Only Shin made it through alive.
그리고 이제 뭐 사실 내가 어디를 가고 있고 또 뭐 내가
I
뭘
really had no idea what to do or where to go. All I knew was that I needed to get away as far as possible.
Of course, of course.
Shin crossed the border into China and survived by working odd jobs. He made his way to Shanghai and from there gained passage to Seoul in South Korea. Shin had freed his body, but he began to realize his mind was still enslaved.
You're free. How did that feeling?
When I come to South Korea, in the night I sleep.
Nightmare.
Yeah, 악몽에 시달리고 잠을 못 자고.
And because of the nightmares and the mental distress, I couldn't even eat.
그러니까 이제 근데 병원에서는 나보고 그걸 이제 PTSD라고.
I was diagnosed with severe PTSD.
그리고 나서 이제 내가 그때부터 이제 나한테 많은 질문들.
And from that point is when I started having questions in my head about life and.
How long were you in South Korea?
한국에만 한 10년 됐죠.
About 10 years.
10 years. It's a long time to get acclimated. Which brings up you.
그냥 뭐 처음에 보고 나서.
From when I first saw her, I liked her right away and I thought she was pretty. And within a few days, I asked if she had a boyfriend, and he's very brave.
Very brave.
Very brave, I must say.
Marrying Leanne and choosing to start a family was, for Shin, a decisive break from the chains that had bound him for so long.
제일 힘들었던 게 왜 한국에서 살고 있는 사람들은
It was so hard for me to comprehend and look at the world around me where parents love their children and feed their children and clothe their children and care for them.
근데 이제 내 아들인데 내 아들.
But now that we are expecting our son, I see how my wife is preparing for it, and I see that there's a child growing inside of her, and I just see the world differently.
Well, Shin, thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Really appreciate your coming and doing this.
Hope to see you again, maybe.
All right, that's a good idea. And my darling,
Thank you.
thank you.
So nice meeting you.
Take care of that young'un.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Shin didn't suddenly feel free. He had to learn what freedom is, experiencing the joy and challenges of life, the complex choices you have to make. He has made those choices. He's gotten married. He has a kid on the way. And that's what gives freedom meaning.
Freedom is a state of mind, and this man is living proof of that. He found a way to be free, even though his body was utterly trapped for 43 years. I'm headed to Louisiana to meet Albert Woodfox. He was imprisoned here in Angola State Penitentiary for most of his life. Originally convicted of armed robbery at age 18, he ended up in solitary confinement for longer than anyone else in American history.
Aha. Mr. Woodfox.
Freeman, welcome to my home.
Nice to meet you.
I would expect anyone who spends 4 decades in solitary to emerge with a broken soul and deadened mind. But Albert appears healthy and well-adjusted. I've come to find out how.
So, what got you in prison?
I was a predator in my own community. A petty criminal, a person of the street. I was undisciplined, unmotivated and stuff. But my crime for going to prison was an armed robbery charge.
Did you go straight to Angola when you were convicted?
No, I actually escaped the very day I was sentenced to 50 years.
Okay. All right. You escaped, you're out for a little while?
Well, I went to New York.
You went to New York?
It was a defining moment in my life because while in Harlem, I had a up-close encounter with the Black Panther Party. I had always noticed a certain fear in African Americans, even those who defied their odds and achieved certain goals in life. For the first time in my life, where I seen black people, and I didn't see that fear, I didn't feel that fear. Talking about revolution and organizing the black community to protect the people, some of the sisters, and although they possessed outward beauty, it was the inner beauty that I was seeing. It was the strength, the determination, the sense of purpose. I was profoundly shocked when I realized that, hey, I am worth something. I do matter. I actually joined the Black Panther Party.
Okay.
But I got arrested again, and I was eventually extradited back to Louisiana. And after that, they shipped me to Angola in '71.
But it was an incident a year after his arrival in Angola that would change the course of Albert's life. A prison guard was found murdered.
April 17th, 1972, they found a correctional officer named Brent Miller murdered in one of the units. Each unit has 4 dormitories. And I was in the very last unit.
Even though Albert's unit was nowhere near the scene of the crime, prison authorities accused him of the murder.
Did they ever find out who did it?
Well, they could have. They had a identifiable bloody fingerprint on the door. They had the fingerprints of every prisoner in Angola at that time. They could have found out who that fingerprint was for.
Albert believes he and 2 other inmates were framed because of their affiliation with the Black Panthers.
They labeled me a militant. During that time, a militant meant you was a Panther. I was placed in solitary confinement April 18, 1972, and I didn't get out of solitary confinement until February 19, 2016.
Albert and the other 2 inmates each spent decades in solitary confinement. They became known as the Angola Three. Human rights groups around the world declared their punishment cruel and inhumane.
Well, this room is a little bigger than the cell to give you some idea of the size of the cell we lived in solitary confinement. The cell is approximately, 9 feet long and 6 feet wide.
This is the length of it?
Yes.
Good Lord.
So you have a very narrow path that you can walk up and down the cell.
How much time you spend in this space?
23 hours out of the day.
23 hours every day?
Every day.
7 days a week?
7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's a living nightmare, filled with one horror after another. That's the only way I can describe prison. The strip search. Now that is one of the most humiliating experiences you could go through. And you have to stand before these people and stripped completely naked. And you have to, raise your genitals and you open your mouth, and this is what they used to do, our ancestors on slave blocks. And so we started resisting, we wouldn't do it. They would tell you strip and you refuse, and they'd beat you and tear your clothes off you and stuff, slam you down on the desk. I don't know how many times I got beat.
Albert's physical world was incredibly small and oppressive, but he refused to let his cage confine him.
That would seem to close the mind, Albert. Didn't close yours.
I never thought about being in the cell. My mind, emotions, and all that were beyond the confines of that cell. I said that if me dying in solitary confinement, become a better human being and to make those around me better, it would be worth it. I started trying to raise the level of conscience of the prisoners in the dormitory I lived in, educate, agitate, organize against prison corruption, prison brutality.
Albert had freed his mind, even though his body remained confined.
We are deeply disappointed that Mr. Woodfox will not be released today.
Twice Albert had his conviction overturned. Twice more, the state imposed new charges. Finally, government officials offered to release Albert if he pleaded no contest to lesser charges. On his 69th birthday, after 43 years and 10 months in solitary, Albert Woodfox became the last of the Angola Three to be released. Albert's body finally followed his mind to freedom. He's finally reunited with his family, and he gets to enjoy being a great-grandfather. He's also an advocate for prisoners' rights.
You were amazed at people who were black but not afraid. And I think part of your freedom while incarcerated was freedom from fear. Because if you had been afraid, you wouldn't have done any of that.
No, I don't think I could. Every time, I had to take a stand, and knowing that there would be some retribution, but still overcoming the fear, finding the strength to say, I still got to do this. I have to do this.
That's spelled C-O-U-R-A-G-E.
Thank you.
Albert Woodfox had 4 decades in solitary confinement to think about freedom. In prison, he learned to cast off the chains that bound him physically and found an inner freedom. Nelson Mandela said, to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Something we must all strive for.
Life without the concept of freedom seems alien to most of us today. For most of recorded history, freedom was the domain of only a select few: royalty, nobility, and the wealthy. But in 1776, 13 British colonies in North America dared to declare freedom as a basic human right. I'm headed to the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia to meet with its librarian, Patrick Spiro. He studies documents dating back to the time of the country's founding.
What you're looking at here is one of the first printings of the Declaration of Independence. The first section is the preamble.
Yeah.
And this is where they talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the idea is that individuals should be free to do these things, and government is constituted to protect those freedoms. And what the king has done is broken that contract, broken that trust. And so they have to be freed from the king in order to be free to do what they want.
Now, can you say that this was the first time a group of people decided that they wanted to be free to do whatever the heck they wanted to do?
Well, I think it's the first time that it was ever written in an official way.
But this is not the only version of the Declaration of Independence that survives.
The other document that I want to show you is this, Thomas Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence. And you can see on the side, there's these notes.
Yeah.
Once Congress got their hands on this, they started changing words, changing meanings. I think the most notable one is in that famous phrase that people are endowed with certain unalienable rights. Jefferson originally wrote inherent and inalienable rights. Inherent rights, which Jefferson used several times, means that all people are born with them.
With these rights. Okay, so if these rights are not inherent, then you're not necessarily born with them. Only a few people are born with them.
And that applied only to white society.
White male
Yes,
society.
yes.
It never occurred to me that the rights to freedom spelled out in the Declaration of Independence were deliberately phrased to exclude slaves and women. Thomas Jefferson's original draft, preserved here in the American Philosophical Society, describes the rights as inherent, meaning they should apply to everybody from birth. But the final signed version only describes certain unalienable rights. In other words, only rights landowning white men already had couldn't be taken away.
The Declaration of Independence, it says that all men are created equal. That's not what it meant?
They aren't writing for the enslaved. They aren't writing for women. The thing is about this document is that slavery existed in this period, but the word is never used. And they're purposeful about not using it because they know that it does not comport with the idea of liberty, that there's that contradiction, that paradox.
Is it safe to say that Jefferson was probably one of our most enigmatic presidents?
Yes. Well, you know, the thing is Jefferson was imperfect, you know. Jefferson had slaves. Jefferson's imperfections got at the American paradox.
Okay. So the Declaration of Independence is not a document guaranteeing freedom.
Yes. I think that's fair. But once you put that writing in stone, it empowered people, it inspired people, it drove them to realize what those words meant.
Could mean.
Well, it took a lot of fighting and effort, heroic actions, bravery, people willing to risk their lives to realize the promise of the Declaration.
The Declaration of Independence was not designed to free everyone in America. Its original purpose was to free powerful American landowners from any obligations to the King of England. But once those white men had signed that document, they unwittingly opened the road to freedom for the rest of us to walk along.
Freedom doesn't come without a fight. What American revolutionaries fought for over 2 centuries ago, other revolutionaries continue to battle for today. I've come to Guatemala to meet freedom fighter and Nobel Peace Prize winner Rigoberta Menchú.
A Guatemalan Indian rights activist who fled her country in 1981 after security forces killed her family.
She has dedicated her life to securing a better future for the indigenous peoples of her country.
Hello, hello, hello.
Señor Freeman.
Rigoberta belongs to the Quiche, one of over 20 indigenous groups of Mayan descent, which make up about half of Guatemala's population. For centuries, the Maya were denied voting rights and land ownership and were forced to labor on plantations. Some of the worst oppression came during the 36-year Guatemalan Civil War, when tens of thousands of Maya were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. Rigoberta gave voice to the plight of her people with an oral testimony that would become her book, I, Rigoberta Menchú.
That book seemed to make quite an impact. Why do you think that is?
Fui la primera guatemalteca que pudo decir lo
I was
que
the first
pasaba.
Guatemalan that was able to talk about what was happening here in
Yo
Guatemala.
creo que Guatemala fue un laboratorio.
I think
para la
Guatemala
crueldad.
was a laboratory for cruelty.
Aquí se practicó la tortura.
Here they practiced torture, they practiced forced disappearance, and they practiced brutal hatred against the Mayans.
Rigoberta's father began organizing rural workers and fighting for indigenous rights. But he drew the attention of the regime, which was bent on rooting out guerrillas.
O sea que realmente la guerra en mi casa.
The war
llegó
reached my
en
home in 1979.
Mi hermano Patrocinio fue secuestrado.
My brother was kidnapped.
Tenía 16 años.
He was 16 years old.
Que a él lo habían torturado y él lo ejecutaron.
And then he was tortured, and then he was shot to death.
On January 31st, 1980, Rigoberta's father joined a group of activists occupying the Spanish embassy in Guatemala City. They were protesting massacres and kidnappings taking place in the countryside. The authorities ordered a raid, but then the embassy caught fire and police blocked the exits.
It was in the embassy on fire?
Sí. Después, 3 meses después de la muerte de mi padre, fue secuestrada mi madre.
3 months after the death of my father, my mother was kidnapped.
Ella vivió lo más cruel de la tortura.
And she suffered the worst of the torture.
Después, otro de mis hermanos había sido fusilado.
And then another one of my brothers had been shot to death.
Your father,
Tu papá,
your mother,
tu mamá,
2 brothers
dos hermanos
killed.
Sí,
matados.
sí, sí.
They never caught up with you?
Las hermanas de la Sagrada Familia
The sisters of the Sacred Family brought me to Guatemala City.
colocaron con religiosos en México.
They were able to get me out, hide me with religious orders in Mexico
How long were you there?
14 años.
for 14 years.
14 years in Mexico.
14 años. Yo hice la promesa de luchar.
So I made a promise to fight against impunity for the rest of my life.
Me convertí en un vocero.
And I became a spokesperson for Guatemala.
Rigoberta traveled around the world, spreading the story of the Maya's quest for freedom. She addressed the United Nations. In 1992, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. Her tireless work brought international pressure on Guatemala's government and helped lead the way to peace.
In Guatemala, just as in the civil rights movement in the U.S., some people chose to fight for freedom with the sword, while others chose the pen. It is those who chose the path of peace, I believe, who laid the foundation for real change. If freedom is ever going to become a universal human right, it needs people willing to champion it, no matter what the danger. I'm headed to New York to meet a woman who is fearless in her march for freedom. Nadia Tolokonikova is a founding member of Pussy Riot, a Russian protest rock band. In 2012, Pussy Riot staged a flash concert inside a Moscow cathedral. Their aim was to draw attention to what they saw as suppression of democratic freedoms by Russian President Vladimir Putin with the collusion of the Russian church. Nadia's musical protest cost her 22 months in prison. She's free now, living in New York. And she refuses to be cowed into silence. Now the name, Pussy Riot, very outgoing and daring and ear-catching, gets people's attention. How many of you started this?
Me and my friend, Kat.
Mm-hmm.
But we have open membership, because the idea was to start a movement, and so everybody could join.
Your group, the reason you got arrested was you did this raunchy performance in a church.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you do that? Was it because you knew you would get arrested and draw a lot of attention, or?
I was just really angry, because I woke up one morning and they told everybody in my country that Vladimir Putin was the next president. So like 5 months before the elections, they just announced it. And I was confused. I didn't really like it.
You went to jail. What was that like?
It made me more stubborn. I was stubborn before, but like, it made me more focused. If you're able to find inspiration in everything, then you could find inspiration in jail too. But it doesn't change the fact that you don't have any medication, the conditions are terrible. I was approached by a lot of women in my camp, and they told me, like, look, you're the only one person who could actually help us. You have media, and you have lawyers, and you have a voice, so just tell what's going on in this prison.
Nadia now had another oppressor of freedom to target: Russian prison authorities. She staged multiple hunger strikes and drafted letters of protest.
So I was writing these papers to all these different prison officials about what I want from them. I wanted them improve the food. I wanted them to improve our conditions.
Well, I mean, make enough noise. It seems to me that they would want to shut you completely up. Stick a needle in your neck and you die. You never worried about that?
It could happen, yeah. It could happen.
Even while she was locked in a Russian prison, Nadia Tolokonikova remained a freedom fighter, battling for basic human rights for inmates.
So I wrote an open letter, and I somehow sneaked with this open letter, and I passed it to the free world. And it's all over the world. It's in the biggest Russian media, and it's in Guardian, and it's in Times, and it's everywhere. I did achieve something, because several guys who were in my prison officials, they were fired from their jobs.
What do you hope to do, ultimately?
I think I'm just trying to build this community all around the world. You could create some wave of inspiration or energy, and then you could inspire some other people. If you can inspire 5 people around you, that's enough, because if that 5 people inspire somebody else, and then it just will grow. I think freedom is a process. It's not an idea, it's a process of exploring yourself and your existence in the world. Would you have freedom from wage slavery, then join in the grand industrial band? Would you from misery and hunger be free, then come do your share like a man?
Nadia fights for freedom wherever she sees people without it. In Russia, she fought for democratic rights. In prison, she fought for human rights.
There is power in the band of working men when they stand hand in hand. That's a power, that's a power.
In America, she's singing an early 20th century workers' rights tune, reflecting one of her new fights, the freedom to join labor unions.
One industrial union grand.
Freedom may be an eternal principle, but in reality, freedom will wither and die unless people like Nadia fight for it, rejuvenate it, nourish it.
Hand in hand, that's a power that must rule in every land. One industrial union grand.
Most freedom fighters struggle against outside oppressors, kings, governments, or prison guards. But there's another form of freedom, the freedom to be and to be seen as who we really are. I'm meeting Victoria Khan, a woman who has fought for freedom in every aspect of her life. She grew up in Afghanistan during the tumult of the early 90s. The Taliban were gaining a foothold, but were being fought by homegrown rebel groups led by Ahmad Shah Massoud.
You have quite a story to tell me. Start way back and tell me.
I was born in Afghanistan, and my parents were working for Ahmad Shah Massoud. My mom and dad adored me, of course, and I have a little sister.
The Civil War breaks out somewhere when you're around 6 or 7 years old.
So one night, there's something you can feel. There's loud and screaming and gunshots. And everyone's home had hidden areas. And my mom and dad, they put us, both of us, in there. I remember my mom saying, "Don't you come out until everything is quiet." Then they kissed us. They said, "Take care of your sister," and that was it.
Can you tell me what happened when you came out?
The street was full of dead bodies, blood. It's impossible to recognize who's who. Not only they shot people, they chopped off heads, chopped off body parts.
Did you find your parents?
No. After the parents were killed, all the children were taken by mullahs. And these imams and mullahs would pick, I'll take him, her, him, her.
How did that go?
I did that for, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 months. Until I saw this imam on top of my sister molesting her. And she was 5.5 years old. So when he went to prayer room, ran into the house, grabbed my sister, and I put her on me because she couldn't even walk. She was bleeding, and I carried her on my back maybe a few miles till we found a woman who was sitting outside her home. She took us in and gave us some dry bread and water. But then she told us she's going to take us to some very safe place. It was a Wahhabi camp for children, where they start telling you how become a suicide bomber, but they're not going to just upfront coming up and say, we're going to train you to become a suicide bomber. You're wanting to be, because they say you're going to meet your mom and dad. And we really, really wanted to see our parents.
Just as Victoria believed she was about to be shipped to Pakistan for more jihadi training, the rebel leader Ahmad Shah Massoud attacked the Wahhabi camp.
Ahmad Shah Massoud and maybe 40, 50 fighters comes in, the horses with their weapons. Oh my God, this person's gonna save me. Ahmad Shah Massoud kills every single one of these people who are torturing these children. So he rescues every one of us, 500, 600 children. That's Ahmad Shah Massoud. He was not just a leader of our country, he was a spiritual leader.
Savior.
Savior, that's what I was looking for.
After Victoria and her sister were liberated, a woman offered them safe passes to Tajikistan.
So you got this woman, she's taking you now to Tajikistan.
Yes, we're crossing a border. I'm crying, I said, I don't want to be separated from my sister. I want to wear a burqa so nobody sees me as a boy.
Wait. You were not a girl.
I was in the boy body.
Boy.
I look skinny little Persian boy physically and beautiful girl inside.
Many people today fight for the freedom to live as their minds and spirits compel them to. But Victoria Khan's struggle to free her true self was coupled with a long battle to stay alive. As a transgender woman, she grew up in Afghanistan being seen as a boy. But while crossing the border into Tajikistan with her younger sister, Victoria wanted to make sure they were not separated. So she put on a burqa.
The burqa was that lightning stroke which says yes.
When I put it on, that's first time that I felt what freedom really meant. It felt so right. First time I felt like it's like wings I had in my back that I could fly.
Okay.
Now I get the taste of that. Now I cannot forget it, and I cannot give up never having it either.
Victoria spent the next few years making her way from Tajikistan to Europe, where her sister now lives. Eventually, Victoria made it to the U.S. She had freed herself from the mortal dangers of her childhood, but she still wasn't free.
You're in the United States, well, we're free. You can do pretty much whatever you want. Do you feel free?
I was yearning for that feminine feeling. Remember, when I put the burqa on, it made me feel free. But I thought putting this Western skirt and the headbands on, it will make me also, again, feel the same powerful feelings. But I had a little bump on that road because closer to the mirror I got, there was a fuzzy mustache start growing. That was terrifying. Terrifying to think that it's actually will become like my father's with full face, beard. I was tired of acting as a man. It was exhausting 24/7. So first I decided to do my facial. It took me almost a year and a half to do electrolysis and lasers, and all that is it's extremely painful thing. Then why don't I just do the entire surgery all back to back? I went to Colombia, had 18 surgeries back to back.
We have a saying about freedom. It's not just walls and bars.
Sometimes it's just the mind.
You're right. Being free from anything and anyone is the best thing we can ever experience as a human being.
I hope you do all the things you want to do. You've earned them.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Victoria has traveled a long road to freedom. She was born in a country at civil war, survived becoming an orphan, escaped becoming a suicide bomber. But the hardest ordeal was the last, having the courage to free the person she truly is. Abraham Lincoln said, "Those who deny freedom to others deserve it not for themselves." But the war for universal freedom is far from won, and the battle lines only move forward slowly. Around the world, millions of people still live in slavery. Women still struggle to be granted the same rights as men. Others just want to be allowed to be the person they know they are inside. It's been truly humbling to meet those people who fought so hard for their freedoms. Their stories are a shocking reminder of how vigilant we must be to protect human rights. But they also give me a glimmer of hope that one day those rights will apply to all of us.